because there hasn't been a day I've been with the Israeli Defense Forces in the last year and a half when I haven't seen how they've been operating, and then read the world's news the next day and read it as if these were polar opposites of each other. As I say, you know, Israelis enter hospital. Yes, because the hospital was somewhere where there's footage of hostages from the 7th being taken in on the 7th and not for care.
I want to lay some propositions before you. When October 7th made its presence known, the first thing that occurred to me, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, if I have some misapprehension, the terrible hand of Iran is behind Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran has absolutely no compunctions about sacrificing every single Palestinian to the cause in as brutal a fashion as possible to capitalize on the public relations scandal that can be made of that.
Yeah.
They've got no feeling whatsoever for the Palestinians. They're pure cannon fodder in the eternal war against the great Satan and Israel, right? The U.S. and Israel. That seems appropriate?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what the hell? I went to Oxford, you know, and the first bloody thing that those half-wits asked me when I was on stage was if I was happy about this tweet I made on October 8th, which was, "Give them hell, Netanyahu," which I paid quite the price for, let me tell you. And although not so much a price as many people have paid, put it that way. And so what's Israel to do when they're faced with a disposable people, so to speak, that will be sacrificed at a moment's notice by their own leadership, by their own corrupt philosophy, and by the mullahs of Iran? What possible response could Israel have except to roll over and what, submit?
Well, a lot of people would like them to do that, of course, but that's not an option. There's a famous story that Joe Biden tells. It's actually a good story for Joe Biden. Being Joe Biden, he's told it a lot. But he, when he was a young senator, once met Golda Meir, former prime minister of Israel, indeed the prime minister during 73. And she famously said to Joe Biden when she was showing him around, you know, you forget, Senator Biden, we have a secret weapon. And Biden thought that Golda Meir was going to tell him about Israel's nuclear project. And he was all ears. I said, what's your secret weapon? She said, we have nowhere else to go. So anyone who thinks that rolling over is a possibility for Israel is simply somebody who wants them to be gone. What is clever about Hamas and its backers in Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Government, is that they know exactly how to put Israel in an even more intolerable situation each time they attack. So, for instance, they know that if you kidnap Israelis, one of the absolutely central things of the fabric of Israeli society, as with most Western societies, is you don't allow your citizens to remain behind, just like you don't leave your soldiers behind. That if you fall behind enemy lines, if you are taken behind enemy lines, the state will do everything it can to get you back. And that has been a compact in Israel since the foundation in 48, and a really central thing. So Hamas knew, and I have lots of testimony from people who, for instance, overheard terrorists on the morning as they were lying dead or other things, heard the terrorists at, for instance, the Nova Party debating which of the young girls they should shoot and which they should kidnap. And, you know, there were debates that they might have had too many people, too many girls to take back, for instance. But Hamas did the kidnapping knowing that to have 250 Israelis in captivity is to have an unbelievable advantage over the Israelis, because they're going to have to come in. They're going to try to save them. They're going to try to rescue them.
They'll exchange hundreds of terrorists for single Israelis.
As happened recently, an exchange of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails for committing acts of terrorism, preparing suicide vests, trying to carry out bombings and much more, knife attacks. They will exchange sometimes hundreds of those Palestinians for, as happened the other week, the coffins of 2 Jewish babies. So,
well, one of the things that's striking about your book is your continued explication of the Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists, psychopaths, their willingness to exploit every element of human decency to wage the most destructive possible of war.
Yeah.
So the tunnels, let's go into that for a minute. So Gaza is 11 by 11 miles, approximately 140 square miles, 350 miles of tunnels, longer than the London Underground, which is stunning fact. stunning fact.
Longer than London Underground, and as I joked to the British military friend, rather better run.
6,000 entrances, many of them in the bedrooms of children.
Almost always where the tunnel entrances come up, they come up in children's bedrooms, in houses throughout Gaza. They come up inside mosques. Well, they come up inside hospitals. In 2014, the BBC acknowledged that the Hamas leadership were coming up from tunnels underneath the Shifa hospital, which is one of their command headquarters. By the way, all of that is, for anyone who cares about this, completely against every law of war. The Geneva Conventions, every convention of war is you are not allowed to fight. You're not meant to fight in civilian clothing. You're not meant to fight and fire from places of worship. You're not meant to stockpile ammunition in hospitals. You're not meant to make civilian homes targets for reasons that our species thought we all understood.
Sufficiently victimized perpetrators have no reason to abide by any standards.
No,
and of course, for an argument.
And of course, militarily, this is all to Hamas's enormous advantage, because again, they know that if there is a stockpile of ammunition or a terrorist or a tunnel entrance or whatever in a civilian home, and even if the Israelis tell all the locals to get out, the world's media will say that Israel bombed or invaded a civilian home.
Or a hospital or a place of worship.
There's a member of the Israeli
None of those words have the same meaning
none of them
in Gaza that they do in the West.
None at all. It's whenever it's reported that, you know, that a hospital has been hit, it's usually reported in the world's press, as Hamas wants, that the Israelis just decided to bomb a hospital, as if they're so evil, these Israelis, that they even bomb hospitals. There was a member of the Israeli war cabinet, Gadi Eisenkot, who I quote in the book because he lost his son fighting in Gaza in the aftermath of October the 7th, and the next day he lost his nephew, also fighting in Gaza. His nephew was killed because, as the Israelis were trying to do this incredibly delicate military operation to get back the hostages, destroy the leadership of Hamas, and minimize any possible civilian casualties, Gadi Eisenkot's nephew was fired upon from a mosque by Hamas terrorists who gleefully opened fire on him and his unit. They were meant to be sticking to Hamas were doing that. The Israelis were trying to stick to the normal laws of conflict and not just destroy the mosque. And so they lost soldiers. This is another example of the way in which Hamas do this. Any normal society that valued the life of their own civilians, like America, Britain, Israel, would, if it knew that its people were going to come under bombardment, often do what the Israelis did in the south and indeed across much of the country, which is you build bomb shelters in every home and you have bomb shelters in every civilian area. And across the south of Israel, that's the case, as it is in the north, because it's been being shelled by Hezbollah for 20 years. Only in Gaza do you get a situation where, and I quote one of the Hamas leaders saying this in an interview with Al Arabiya last year, this Hamas leader was asked by a friendly Arab journalist, why, if you say the civilian casualties in Gaza are so high, why can't you allow the civilians of Gaza to shelter in your tunnel networks that you've built underneath Gaza? And the Hamas leader says, the tunnel system is not for the civilians. The tunnel system is for our fighters and for our weaponry. And the interviewer says, well, who's to look after the civilians? And he says, well, the international community.
Right. Well, that's just testament to the fact that the Palestinians are essentially cannon fodder for the eternal war against Israel and the United States.
Yes, but it's even worse than that, that, of course, an army that fights by the laws of war, which the IDF does, like the American army, like the British army, makes mistakes for sure, like the American army, like the British army, but that fights by the laws of war. When it encounters a terrorist army like this, the civilized army seeks to minimize the civilian casualties, as the IDF has done, and anyone who claims that it hasn't just does not know what's been going on for the last 18 months.
And believes Hamas reports.
And believes Hamas reports.
Which why would anyone ever believe Hamas reports?
Yeah, it's, I mean, why go to a mass murderer to find out their account of their actions, you know? But the point is that when an army like that encounters an army that not just desires death for its enemy, but desires death for the people it purports to govern, and with a kicker in it, seeks death itself. This is a realm of fanaticism and what I call it It's a death cult, a cult that literally worships death. The leadership of Hamas, who I quote in the book, have for decades boasted about the extent to which they love death, embrace death. One of the underlying things in this book, as you know, which we'll come on to doubtless later, but is what happens if a society that actually values life encounters a death cult that worships and glories in death for its foes, but also for itself. We have
suffering and death.
We have seen such movements throughout history. We have seen them, but most of the world has forgotten about them. And I would argue that Israel, to a great extent, forgot about them until 6:30 in the morning on October the 7th, 2023.
Possessed by the spirit of Cain.
Yes. I've seen quite a lot of war and how people act in war, and regard myself as relatively unshockable, or at least aware of the capacity of human evil. But from the moment I started seeing the videos that Hamas took themselves on the morning, and I started seeing them very early, I then saw an awful lot of them, and then far more, even before going to the massacre sites myself, the hospitals and the morgues and so on. But one of the things I could not get out of my head was the glee, the sheer orgiastic glee of the terrorists.
At least the Nazis tried to hide their crimes.
This is a point I've made that has occasionally got me into trouble. What happened on the 7th was as if for some hours in Treblinka, the Nazis had live streamed to the world what they were doing and were proud of it and wanted everyone to know.
And then the universities celebrated it.
I quote a late friend of mine early in the book, as you know, who fled Nazi Germany, Nazi Austria in 1938. And he said towards the end of his life to me and to a historian friend, he said that he had spent his last years thinking, actually, maybe there was a level of anti-Semitism even worse than the Nazis.
Well,
and
hell is a bottomless pit, you know.
Absolutely.
Really.
And it required somebody who had fled Nazism and lost much of his family to Nazism to be able to, in a way, make that point. But the thing, we don't need to get into the competition of, as it were, which is how people see it, but it doesn't diminish anything. But this thing of the ecstasy in death, the ecstasy in bringing death. I quote the young man who phones back to his family in Gaza on a cell phone and says, Father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. I've killed 10 Jews. Get mother on the phone. Turn on to WhatsApp video. I can show you. The endless cries of Allahu Akbar, which, as I said shortly after the 7th, was not something I wanted to hear chanted on our streets much more, knowing this isn't simply an offering of prayer like the Lord's Prayer. And if Christians had in recent memory been massacring people whilst screaming the Lord's Prayer in ecstasy, I think that Christians would have the decency to pipe down a bit about shouting it in public squares in mass. The cry of Allahu Akbar that we're forever told is simply like, it's just a prayer, like saying Sieg Heil in America is just a quoting of German. The use of Allahu Akbar by the terrorists as they're removing a young man's head with a shovel or raping girls and then killing them. 2014, there was a relatively minor war in Gaza compared to this one. And there are many soldiers I spoke to who were involved in the relatively minor conflict in 2014 who were also in Gaza since October 2023. They all said that they noticed when they did house-to-house clearing, going through, trying to find hostages, trying to find weapons, trying to find tunnel entrances, and trying to find the architects of the massacre. They all said the same thing, which was that in 10 years, there was a marked radicalization in the households, in the learning materials, in everything from, and it's not satire, math textbooks of, if you kill 2 Jews and kill another 2 Jews, how many dead Jews do you have? This is the way you learn arithmetic in Gaza under Hamas. This is something that many of us noticed and had warned about for years. But the fruit of this education system, the fruit of this indoctrination was October the 7th. And look at it. It was a catastrophe for the Israelis, and it's turned out to be an utter disaster for the citizens of Gaza. There is an answer to the death cults. There is an answer to the cult of death, which the IDF has shown is the destruction of their leaders, the killing of the psychopaths who would lead a society in this way, and a demonstration of the values of your own society. Now, that has been incredibly hard because there hasn't been a day I've been with the Israeli Defense Forces in the last year and a half when I haven't seen how they've been operating, and then read the world's news the next day and read it as if these were polar opposites of each other. As I say, you know, Israelis enter hospital. Yes, because the hospital was somewhere where there's footage of hostages from the 7th being taken in on the 7th and not for care. Whether it's hospitals, schools, anything else, there was just nothing the IDF could do from the moment they went in, indeed from the moment before they went in, when they were not going to be misrepresented by the world's media in a grand way. But, and I've been asked many times in the last year and a half, why are the Israelis so bad at communicating? Truth is, it's extremely hard to communicate what you're doing to a world which in significant part has already decided that you're the bad guy.
And one that's manipulated as well, very profoundly, by the actors behind the scenes. And all the things that we talked about play into this. The refusal of the West to admit to the existence of malevolence, our inability to understand the difference between a just and an unjust war, our willingness to hide in the shibboleth that war is bad, which is hardly a moral claim at all.
War doesn't solve anything.
Right. War, yeah. Well, and you think about how easy it is to make the moral claim, for example. I've heard many people make this claim. I'm against the death of women and children, as if that's some sort of moral claim.
Well,
as if that's not the basis of common humanity. No one can capitalize on that.
Yes.
On that profession of their morality.
Well, and the other one I come across is people, by the way, and they don't really mean it, by the way, because again and again, the people who say that Israel is killing women and children are apologists for at best and supporters for at worst, a group that videoed themselves killing women and children. And many of the people who say that the Israelis, many of the people who say that the Israelis are doing this are the same people who say that Hamas did not. I mean, that's another level of the psychopathy now in the West. It's like, I've said repeatedly since the 7th, you know, what did we have in the 2017 period? Believe all women. Turned out, don't believe women if they're Jews. Don't believe it then. Don't believe it if the rape is caught on camera by Hamas and they're boasting of it. Don't believe them. These same people who deny that Hamas raped women on the 7th will say that Israeli soldiers are raping women in Gaza. Every single time it's some form of projection,
well, and that's that last-ditch attempt to what would you say, to salvage the oppressor-victim narrative. That's the core. That's the staff in the center of the belief system.
Over 50 cities in occupied Iran have now risen up and are
I like that she's calling it occupied Iran, by the way.
Participating in the nationwide demonstrations and protests against the Islamic Republic. Massive crowds are coming out, and the terrorist Islamic Republic is, of course, responding with violence, shooting directly into innocent, unarmed crowds of Iranians. If these demonstrations and protests were actually about the economic situation, why would Iranians be going out in the streets and yelling, "Long live the king"? Why would they be going out in the streets and saying, "In akharin nabarde Pahlavi barmigarde," which means this is the final battle, Pahlavi will return.
Hi guys, doing this is Sahar TV, and in today's video we will see an Iranian commentator talking about the situation currently happening in Iran, giving you a different point of view, of course an Iranian point of view. I'm gonna try and keep my interruptions to a minimum. Let's watch.
I'm Iranian, and here's everything you need to know in less than 20 minutes about what's currently happening in occupied Iran with the nationwide strikes and protests by Iranians against the Islamic Republic that the mainstream media won't tell you. If you've been watching Iran this week, you already know that something huge is happening. It started on Sunday, December 28, with protests regarding the collapsing economy and the financial crisis, which quickly sparked into anti-Islam, anti-Islamic Republic, pro-revolution, and pro-Shah demonstrations that have rapidly taken over the country. Over the last 6 days, we have seen nationwide strikes by merchants, university students joining in, violent security crackdowns by the Islamic regime terrorist forces, reported deaths, Islamic regime officials attacking Iranians attending funerals, and mounting international attention, especially after President Trump gave an explicit warning to the Islamic Republic that the United States would intervene if the Islamic Republic does not stop murdering innocent Iranians. Events are still rapidly unfolding, but right now I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened day by day in the first 6 days, starting from December 28 until January 2nd. I'm also going to give you the important context from the Iranian perspective that you're not going to get from mainstream media or non-Iranian commentators. The immediate backdrop is the
Guilty is charged.
Islamic Republic of Iran's economic downfall. Inflation has skyrocketed to over 40%, and the rial, which is the official currency of the country, has collapsed to a historic low of 1.4 million rials to $1. Keep in mind, in 1979, when the Shah of Iran was still in power and before the Islamic dictatorship occupied Iran, the value of the rial was 70 to $1. So
Crazy.
just put that into perspective. In 1979, 46 years ago, the value of the rial was 70 rials to $1. Today, it has dropped to a historic low of 1.4 million rials to the US dollar. On Sunday, December 28, because of the collapse of the rial, protests and strikes began to break out across central Tehran and various shops across the city. Shopkeepers shut down their stores in protest of the economic instability and financial collapse of the rial. Videos circulating from Tehran, the capital city of Iran, showed that these chants and strikes are growing. This first day was very significant for us Iranians because it didn't look like scattered anger. It looked like the start of coordinated market pressure. Massive store closures across the city, rapidly increasing crowds, and within hours of the first strike, we started hearing slogans and chants not about the economic crisis, but about who is responsible for the economic crisis and what shopkeepers want. In other words, the demonstrations quickly shifted from complaining about the economic collapse to calling for overthrow of the Islamic Republic, calling for revolution, and calling for the return of the Shah of Iran, His Royal Highness Mirza Pahlavi II, who's currently in exile. At the same time, the Shah of Iran in exile, His Royal Highness King Mirza Pahlavi II, put out a video message to Iranians in occupied Iran, encouraging them to continue the strikes, encouraging them to continue putting pressure on the Islamic Republic in order to overthrow them, and encouraging all Iranians to join in the peaceful demonstrations. On the second day, Monday, December 29, the protests grew, not only in Tehran, but in cities across the country of Iran, including Mashhad and Isfahan. And while the mainstream media was still calling this an economic protest, Iranians actually know the truth. In less than 24 hours, Iranians were out in the streets gathering en masse, calling for revolution, calling for the end of the Islamic Republic, and they were also saying Javid Shah, which means long live the king. In other words, Iranians are calling for the Shah of Iran to return and lead Iran into a transition from the Islamic Republic into a functioning secular democratic system. Because what the mainstream media refuses to tell you is that if these demonstrations and protests were actually about the economic situation, why would Iranians be going out in the streets and yelling, "Long live the king"? Why would they be going out in the streets and saying, "In akharin nabarde Pahlavi barmigarde," which means this is the final battle, Pahlavi will return? In less than 24 hours, the story was no longer about a few shops closed. The story has now become that we are witnessing the biggest pro-revolution, anti-Islamic Republic demonstrations that we have seen in Iran in recent years.
Yes.
But what's even more important about these pro-revolution demonstrations is that Iranians are not only calling for the end of the Islamic Republic, they are also calling for the return of the King of Iran, who is in exile, His Royal Highness Mirza Pahlavi II. On Tuesday, December 30th, the third day of strikes, we see a major escalation. The strikes have now spread to university campuses. And while Reuters and mainstream media still claimed that university students are joining in because of the economic collapse, the truth is actually much different. Because if the situation really was about the economy, why would the university students also be chanting, "Down with the dictator, long live the king, and this is the final battle, Pahlavi will return"? University students are often the engine of sustained protest movements. And so the fact that university students, not just in Tehran, but across various cities in occupied Iran, are now getting involved in the anti-Islam, pro-Shah, pro-revolution demonstrations, that's a pretty big deal. And of course, at the same time, given that the Islamic Republic is a brutal totalitarian dictatorship, it also began violently cracking down on protesters. And keep in mind, the protesters had been pretty much peaceful up until that point. By day 3, the rest of the world was starting to catch on to what we Iranians had noticed right away on day 1, that these protests were no longer about the economy, and they were about politics. They were about overthrowing the terrorist Islamic Republic. They were about getting rid of Sharia law. They were about getting rid of Islam, and they are also about bringing the Shah of Iran back to Iran. By day 4, Wednesday, December 31, the demonstrations were in full swing. Over 50 cities in occupied Iran have now risen up and are
I like that she's calling it occupied Iran, by the way.
participating in the nationwide demonstrations and protests against the Islamic Republic. Massive crowds are coming out, and the terrorist Islamic Republic is, of course, responding with violence, shooting directly into innocent, unarmed crowds of Iranians. His Royal Highness, King Reza Pahlavi II, also issued a New Year's Eve statement. My courageous compatriots, your presence in the streets across Iran has kindled the flame of a national revolution. The continuation and expansion of your presence and taking control of the streets is today our foremost vital priority.
Guys, sorry, not guy. I know that there's guys and girls watching this, so my apologies. I'll include her full video down in the link below. I don't want you to watch the full thing on my platform. Of course, I'm trying to increase exposure for other creators around the world talking about the situation in Iran, in Venezuela, in Israel, and all around the world. I'm honestly so honored to have the privilege to use my platform to make other people's voices louder. Thank you so much for watching this video, and may we see the downfall of the Islamic Republic of Iran this week. Amen. Bye-bye. If you'd like to watch more of my stuff, please check out my channel down below. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that notification button so you can be notified every time I upload new content. If you'd like to support me and the channel financially, you can do that using Buy Me Coffee or Patreon down in the links below. Also, we now have a Discord that you can join down in the link below. And
the following program is a dramatic reenactment. Certain events have been altered and names have been changed. The story you're about to see is based upon first-hand accounts of the actual events.
Navy SEALs entrust their lives to their training.
Stop being greedy pieces of like. Where's my money? Where's my money? You little bitch. You fucking bitch.
how you doing? This is Sahar TV, and today's video is going to be a bit different. It's not going to be about Israel. It's not going to be about Venezuela. It's not going to be about Iran. It's going to be about honesty. In this video, we're going to see Trax NYC. If you don't know who it is, he's a jeweler from New York City. And a customer went inside his shop and said that he was scammed by him. Then Trax looks at the receipt and he sees that he's not the one who sold it. It's the guys behind him. And oh boy, it goes south from there. Let's watch. So this is the first encounter with the scammed customer. Let's watch.
So not only did these fucking pieces of shit, okay, rip you off on this fucking thing, it turned out to be 9-karat gold, right? Yeah. You had a check? Yes. So they're going to be giving you $1,000 on top. Here's $22,000 for your fucking trouble. These fucking bum motherfuckers, bro. You get people in this exchange, people in this. Stop being greedy pieces of fucking lying shit. So I'm Trax. I want this coming up with a fucking scheme every fucking time. Keep fucking scheming, bro! 9 fucking carat this, 2 carat that, this, that. Security what, bro? Fucking bullshit, bro! Stop fucking stealing! You gotta come up. I want my fucking money, motherfuckers, bro. I gave the money up. You wanna be Trax NYC? Here's Trax NYC! Akai, garbage! You motherfuckers are garbage!
For the people saying, why is he going on a rant? You need to understand that he's fighting for what's right. He's fighting for people getting scammed. He's fighting for greediness. If you're making a deal, actually sell what you're selling. And don't make shit up. Now here's the bill of sale that the scammed customer brought to Trax NYC to show him exactly what happened.
Receipt from this disgusting company that pretends to be me, says they're Trax NYC, sells my customer a bracelet, rips them off, and rips them off on the gold. Shit, they're saying it's 14 karat gold. Well, we're gonna test this bracelet right now. Start the test. 10 karat gold. So did they say they were tracks NYC?
Yeah, he tried to portray, he tried to sell one of your products. He said that he ran out one of your rings that you purchased.
Right, that we sell. So you came with a picture of tracks NYC.
Yep, I opened up the website for him.
And then he said he ran out, even though he has nothing to fucking do with me other than to steal my fucking customers all day long. These rats have done this over and over and over again, and I tolerated it. And now they fucked them over on the carrot as well. Yo, Akai, you are fucking thieves, bro. The most disgusting people you'll ever see in your life. It's 64 West 47th Street. Akai is the booth. We're gonna get our money back. $22,000 for me and for all the other customers they scammed. Pull up, we'll group together, we'll sue them, and we'll take their property. 64 West 47th Street. Don't let it slide.
Now Max from Trex NYC is literally going to confront them face to face, and oh boy, it's not ending well for these people from Akai Diamonds.
Where's my fucking money, motherfucker? Where's my fucking money, bitch? Where's my money? I got this fucking bracelet. Where's my fucking money? What are you gonna do, bitch? What are you gonna fucking do? Doc, motherfucker, you say VVS, I3, 14 karat, and you're using my name, you bitch! 6447. Yeah, 6447. Thief! You fucking thief! Bitch!
Stop, take it.
No! Get the fuck your hands off of me, bro!
Guys, this is what fighting for what's right looks like.
This is the part where I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time understanding the level of animosity directed toward Israel right now. Not because I think Israel should be free from criticism, and not because I think the United States has some sort of special obligation to fight Israel's war for them. I don't think that. But I'm also looking at this going, I don't understand this. I'm watching organizations like Hamas, which are committed to genocide within their own charter, which every chance they get engage in these sorts of activities, which militarize things like schools and mosques and hospitals. And then when counter battery strikes go into it, it's like, I can't believe Israel bombed a hospital. Hamas turned it into a military target.
In the last couple of years of Charlie Kirk's life, he was pretty critical on Israel.
Yeah.
He specifically said that they were going to ethnically cleanse 2.5 million people in Gaza. He also said that he believed that on October 7th, there was a stand-down order. He said that he took a helicopter from Jerusalem to Gaza, and it took about 45 minutes, but it took them about 6 to 9 hours to respond. How would you respond to somebody like me that believes in order to be a Christian, you can't be a liberal morally, but also you cannot be pro-life and be pro-Netanyahu, and that we should stop sending endless blank checks to countries overseas?
So when it comes to, so let's put it this way. I've always been generally supportive of Israel's right to exist, right? Well, I'm not generally. I am supportive of Israel's right to exist as a nation state. When it comes to foreign aid, I don't believe the United States government is under any obligation to give another country foreign aid. We do too much of it. Now, that doesn't mean that foreign aid is never acceptable or reasonable or understandable. Sometimes it might make sense. But the problem I see right now is we're looking at a $39 trillion debt. We have a runaway inflationary currency. There's a lot of problems that we have to solve, and I think that we should probably reorient our focus on those. Now, having said that, I disagree with Charlie on some of those other statements. And again, I'm taking you at your word that Charlie said that. I don't think they were trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I just don't. And I don't say that because I'm generally supportive of Israel and generally not supportive of Hamas. I can't stand Hamas. But that doesn't mean that the Israeli government always gets it right. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have to like Netanyahu. By the same token, I know what military operations in urban terrain look like. One of my biggest frustrations with this whole fight is anybody that wants to be critical of the Israeli government or Israeli combat operations, I'm fine. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about what can be done better. That should always be. That's why we have after-action reviews in the military. But I would beg people to understand something here. Part of the reason why the combat operations in Gaza look the way they do is because Hamas benefits from civilian casualties. Hamas has deliberately made their strategy the maximization of their own casualties in order to play on Western sensibilities. Why? Because they can't beat the IDF in a conventional fight. We talk about like hospitals and mosques and schools and things like that. Do you guys want to know why? When we look at the Geneva Convention or we look at the rules of land warfare, why do we take those things off limits? Why are you not permitted to conduct military operations either in those buildings or to target those buildings for artillery and airstrikes? Because of the propensity of civilian casualties, right? They're not supposed to be military targets. What happens when your enemy makes it a military target? Am I not allowed to respond now? Wait a second, wait. Am I not allowed to respond now? Am I not allowed to do anything? What happens when I have to conduct urban military operations? And one thing I like to point out is I was a Green Beret, but I wasn't just a Green Beret. I was a Green Beret, went through Sephardic, which is our premier close quarters battle school. I went through SFAUC, which is our Special Forces Operation Urban Combat course. I went through Ranger School, Sniper School, EMT, Airborne, Air Assault, like the list goes on. The United States government spent a whole hell of a lot of money making me a pretty good combat operative. But when you're conducting operations in an urban environment, a 17-year-old that picked up an AK-47 for the first time, spraying it down a hallway kills you. It's a casualty-heavy environment. And the IDF was still going into some of these places announcing that they were coming in to do combat operations. You know they're not required to do that by the rules of land warfare or the Geneva Convention, right? And yet they did it anyways. Why? They wanted to minimize civilian casualties. So why did Hamas insist that they be there? Because they wanted to maximize civilian casualties. Why? Because every time a civilian dies in Gaza, the UN and Doctors Without Borders and CNN and MSNBC and every college campus in America goes, I can't believe what the Jews did to these poor Palestinian civilians. They're creating an impossible thing. We are rewarding Hamas for killing their own people. And Hamas doesn't care. The senior leadership could not care less. They're billionaires. So the thing that I would have said respectfully to Charlie is we can have a conversation all day long on how do we do a better job of minimizing civilian casualties when conducting combat operations. But the moment we start letting Hamas get away with what they were intentionally doing to create additional casualties so that they could beat the IDF the only way they know how, and that's by applying external pressure, then all we do is encourage that sort of behavior, not just from Hamas, but every terrorist organization. And so I think that distinction needs to be made.
Well, wouldn't those same criticisms, go towards Israel bombing churches and schools and things along the lines of the, and operations that they've done against Hamas and persecuting Christians?
Well, so I have a hard time buying that Israel is actively out there persecuting Christians. I have seen people go on Tucker and other places talk about persecution of Christians in Israel. I can tell you it's never been my experience, nor has it been the experience of any of the other Christians that I've known that have gone to Israel. You know where I have seen a lot of persecution of Christians? Muslim states. And so this is the part where I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time understanding the level of animosity directed toward Israel right now. Not because I think Israel should be free from criticism, and not because I think the United States has some sort of special obligation to fight Israel's war for them. I don't think that. But I'm also looking at this going, I don't understand this. I'm watching organizations like Hamas, which are committed to genocide within their own charter, which every chance they get engage in these sorts of activities, which militarize things like schools and mosques and hospitals. And then when counter battery strikes go into it, it's like, I can't believe Israel bombed a hospital. Hamas turned it into a military target. And this is the part where, again, this is why we tell terrorist organizations, you will not be treated like combatants, or you will not be treated like uniformed soldiers if you conduct and if you behave in this sort of manner. But what we just told Hamas in this last conflict, especially countries like France, was they can get away with it now. In fact, why wouldn't they do it? What was the consequence for Hamas to doing this? So look, let me say this as profoundly as I can. War just kind of sucks. It's difficult. And I am always open to hear new ways how it can be done, again, more effectively to prevent civilian casualties. But I'm sorry, for me and everything I look at and all of my knowledge on this and all of my experience with this tells me that Hamas is the one that bears the vast majority of the blame on this one. Yeah, I ran the numbers once. If, let's say, Mexico came into Southern California, some would say they already have. Let's say a Mexican organization came into Southern California and we'll adjust for population between Israel and the United States. Murdered 40,000 Americans and then kidnapped another 1,200 Americans and took them into captivity in Mexico. What do you think the United States military's response would be to something like that? I know what it was to the Twin Towers because I was a part of the response. And so I just, like on some level, I am struggling with understanding why we don't understand the absolute rage that the Israelis had after October 7th. Now, that doesn't justify engaging in atrocities, and to the extent that atrocities happen, that should be dealt with and prosecuted. I think this is something that requires some perspective. Again, my standard is truth, and I use logic and inductive and deductive reasoning with evidence. I'm sorry, what is your familiarization with combat operations?
I mean, you can refer to that, but at the same time, it took 45 minutes. Okay, the whole country is IDF. So they're all soldiers. Every single person in that country is a soldier, right? They're all soldiers in that country.
And the idea that nobody responded for 45 minutes is inaccurate.
They didn't respond for 6 to 9 hours.
Okay,
every news report out there says
the idea that nobody responded for 6 to 9 hours is not accurate. I don't know where that's being put out.
Well, that's the news. That's their local news. That's news. That's our U.S. news.
If you
look up the reports, that's what it says. It says it took 6 to 9 hours for them to respond.
Okay, it did not take 6 to 9 hours for them to respond. I don't know what news reports are saying that it took 6 hours for them to respond. It's inaccurate. And again, this is another problem that I tend to have with this. We don't believe the media until we want to.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, you know.
Well, I can tell you, having been there, having spoken to soldiers that were on the ground, spoken to members of the IDF on the ground, spoken to the guards that were called up. This idea that it took 6 to 9 hours to respond is false, talking to people actually in uniform that were getting shot at and returning fire. Now was there an intelligence breakdown? Absolutely. Now, was there a stand down order? I can't speak to, I don't know. Okay, I don't think that's likely, but I don't know. But I have a problem with this idea of, well, it should have gone this way, because I've served in a special operations unit. And don't get me wrong, I love perpetuating the myth that special operations, we have a rule. You'll back me up on this, right? There is a rule in special operations communities all over the world, and that is we always perpetuate the myth. And what this means is when your friend is watching John Wick and he looks at you and says, "Can you do that?" You're tip of the iceberg. And then when he walks out of the room, you're like, right? So all I would say is that I am sure there are any number of things that could have been done better on October 7th, but I'm not willing to say that there was a stand down order or it was deliberate. And I know people that responded far quicker than 6 to 9 hours.
Well, thank you for your service and God bless you.
Thank you, sir.
Our food stocks are dwindling. No change in the Treasury Lord.
9/11 is not a date that Osama bin Laden just picked out of a hat. 9/11 is a symbolic date in the Islamic calendar.
There's nothing more frustrating to me than people doing idiotic things in the name of Christianity. It's frustrating because you know it isn't a real representation of what Christianity is about. So when I hear about Muslim groups trying to start Sharia law in London, for example,
Yeah, you're gay, mate. Get out of here, mate. Get out of here, you fag.
or a Muslim gang beating up a man in the UK,
In Birmingham on Monday, Muslims did take matters into their own hands. The violence was sudden and shocking.
or even the more obvious examples of Islamic violence and terrorism, I wonder, do Muslims feel the same way? Are these senseless acts of violence a departure from real Islam in the same way that these spectacle preachers are a departure from real Christianity? I had heard many Muslim thought leaders claim yes, and emphatically so. Then I came across this story of a woman who survived the Lebanese civil war. As a 10-year-old girl, her house was destroyed, and for 7 years she lived in an 8-foot by 10-foot underground bomb shelter. Now, Brigitte Gabriel is breaking the silence.
So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to crunch 1,400 years of Islamic history in 5 minutes and make it as exciting as I can possibly make it. Because I hated history when I was a little girl. At this age, I appreciate history. And now I understand why they say those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In order for you to understand why Western civilization is very different than the Islamic world, you need to understand the history of Islam. When Prophet Muhammad supposedly revealed his revelation from the angel Gabriel that he is supposed to be the last of the prophets in the early 600s, he started preaching in his own city, Mecca. He tried to recruit friends and followers to be able to spread his religion. And he tried for 12 years and failed. And after 12 years, he was only able to recruit his immediate family and friends. So he decided, if I go to Medina, which was the Jewish hub of Arabia, the business hub where the Jews lived, if I go there and preach my religion to them, if they accept me, that will buy me respect and stature between my own people, and they will accept me. So Prophet Muhammad started borrowing a lot from the Old Testament to make his religion more palpable to the Jews, to make it a lot similar. This is why you see a lot of similarities between Judaism and Islam. For example, Jews don't eat pigs, Muslims don't eat pigs. Jews pray a few times a day, Muslims pray a few times a day. Jews fast on Yom Kippur, Muslims fast on Ramadan. And this is why you started seeing a lot of good writing in the beginning of the Quran when Prophet Muhammad was saying all the good things about the people of the book. He took his message and went to Medina trying to recruit the Jews, talking about the people of the book, talking about how similar the two religions are. When they refused to accept him and follow him as the last of the prophet, that's when he turned against them and started killing them and started expelling them. That's when Islam went from a spiritual movement for the first 12 years of Islam into a political movement cloaked in religion after the year of the Hijrah, after Muhammad went to Medina and the Jews did not accept him. He became a military warrior and declared war on them and started expelling them. Jews and Christians became dhimmi, or second-class citizens. They were only allowed to stay alive and not be killed only by paying the jizya or the protection tax. So they had a choice: convert to Islam, or if you want to stay alive, you have to pay the jizya or protection tax, living as dhimmi in the Islamic nation. Christians and Jews could not ring church bells. Jews could not blow the shofar. Christians could not ring church bells. They could not pray publicly. Christians and Jews could not gather together and build new churches or new temples. And the way they paid the jizya or the protection tax was in a monthly ceremony where they would get together downtown and the Jew would kneel on his knee and hand his goods to the mullah, who would take the goods as the price for buying the protection. And in many areas, Jews and Christians were given necklaces to wear as a receipt that they paid their jizya or their protection tax. Jews considered najis under Islam. Najis is bodily fluid. Najis is garbage. Najis is dogs. Najis is dirty. So Christians and Jews were treated as second-class citizens. Islam continued to grow. As Islam grew, more people became dhimmi or second-class citizens. Jews and Christians were given identifiable clothing. The yellow star, which was given to the Jews that most people think is a German invention. It was actually an Islamic invention in the 9th century in Iraq by the second Khalif al-Mutawakkil of Iraq, who invented the yellow star for the Jews to be identified as they walked down the street. Because Jews were considered najis, if a Muslim man or a Jew walked on the same side of the street, the Jew had to cross the other side so the Muslim man can walk, so he's not dirtied by the filth of the Jew. Christians were given the zunnar, the belt, which most of you men are wearing right now. That was an Islamic invention for the Christians. Islam continued to grow. They went all the way to Jerusalem. They conquered Jerusalem. Christians couldn't ring their church bells in Jerusalem. The Pope in Rome in 1090 told the Christians, how could you sit idly by and allow your brethren to suffer like this in the Holy Land? You need to go liberate the Christians. You need to go help the Christians. That's why the Crusaders were launched. The Crusaders were not launched because they just felt like waking up in the morning and going and converting a bunch of Muslims or beheading them. The Crusaders were launched to liberate Jerusalem, and they were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years before Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin, took it back, and Jerusalem remained under Islamic control until 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray under the same sky. The Crusaders continued fighting Islam, and for 300 years they tried and failed. And by the 1300s, the Crusaders disappeared because they could not win against Islam. Islam continued to expand. They went all the way to Central Europe. They went all the way to China. They went to India. They conquered Spain. They changed the name of Spain from Spain to Andalusia. And they started, as they advanced, as they conquered more nations, more people paid the jizya or the protection tax. And this is how the Islamic Empire grew. It went all the way until they was stopped at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. 9/11 is not a date that Osama bin Laden just picked out of a hat. 9/11 is a symbolic date in the Islamic calendar. By the 1600s, Islam had covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire did at its peak. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, the Europeans were experiencing the European Industrial Revolution, where the Europeans were able to invent products on factory lines, where they are able to make money and sell products, which gave them the money to build a strong army in order to fight the Muslims. And that's how they were able to stop them at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. The Europeans started the pushback against Islam. They pushed them out of Europe. They pushed them out of all the way to the Middle East and North Africa. By 1924, the Islamic Empire ended. In 1924, the Islamic Caliphate ended in Turkey by President Ataturk, who was a secularist. He ended the Islamic Empire, and he gave women rights to vote. He gave women a right to an education, a right to work, a right to choose a husband. He forbid women from wearing the hijab. He forbid men from wearing the beard. The Muslims hate him so much that they consider him a Jewish agent because they believe that his mother in her bloodline was Jewish, and that was the influence on Ataturk. By the time the Islamic Empire or the Islamic Caliphate or the Islamic State ended in 1924, the Islamic Caliphate had existed for 1400 years, and it ended less than 100 years ago. By the time the Islamic Caliphate ended in 1924, 270 million people around the world were killed by Islam. 270 million. And we didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and there was nuclear weapons. All of these people were killed, butchered by the sword. The people in the world, less than 100 years ago, how many people knew this history? Please raise your hand. We in America have failed to educate our children about history. We in America failed to educate our population about history. Our children in high school, you take any 17, 16-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, and ask them about World War II. They can't even tell you what happened in World War II. For them, it's ancient history, and we still have our World War II veteran walking among us. That's how little we know of history. Islam ended in 1924, the Caliphate. People thought the Caliphate will never be resurrected. The Caliphate will never come back. But two things happened in the Middle East in the last century that made the Islamists be able to resurrect the Caliphate. Number one is the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia, which we were able to discover and were stupid enough to allow them to nationalize it. And the number two that happened was Ayatollah Khomeini coming to power in 1979. That gave the Islamists the money and also the spiritual covering in order to explode on the world stage. And people say, oh, well, the Wahhabis exported their Wahhabi radical religion. The Wahhabis are the name of Wahhab. They're not a different sect of Islam. They follow the authentic preaching of Prophet Muhammad, the way Prophet Muhammad lived and practiced his religion. This is why neither you or me or any infidel can step a foot in Mecca, because as far as they're concerned, we are filth. And as infidels, we're not allowed to step a foot, not President Obama and not anybody else. As a matter of fact, Al-Qaeda used to use Saudi Arabia and its success as an excuse to recruit members, as the example to show them how Allah has blessed Saudi Arabia because of the way they adhere to the tenets of Islam. And today we talk about ISIS. ISIS is not a new invention. ISIS resurrected the caliphate that ended less than 100 years ago. Except we are too ignorant and too uninformed to understand what ISIS is doing and why ISIS is succeeding. Two things you need to understand about Islam and the principles of war in Islam. One is the law of taqiyya, which means lying and deception. It means that a Muslim man can lay his hand on the Quran and swear that he is telling the truth, knowing that he is lying, but also knowing that the Quran will forgive him because he is advancing the cause of Islam. The second thing you need to know about is that the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, which is an Islamic principle of war and a model on how to deceive your enemy when you have to sign peace treaties with your enemy. And it is based on an example by Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad was attacking the Meccans and their caravans when he was living in Medina. One day he attacked them because this is how he got the goodies. He would attack them, rob them, and spread the goodies among his men. And this is how he was able to recruit, because this is how people made money without working. And so he attacked the Meccan caravans. When he realized he's not able to defeat the Meccans in that city of Al-Hudaybiyah, in that place, he signed a 10-year treaty with them. Does that sound familiar? A 10-year treaty with them that says he will not attack them, he will have peace with them, he will not declare war on them. Muhammad used the treaty for 2 years to build his military, strengthen his army, and when he realized he was strong enough to attack his enemies when they least expected it, because they thought they had a peace treaty with Muhammad, he broke the treaty, attacked them 2 years later, and Mecca fell within 24 hours because they were not expecting the attack. And that became a principle of war in Islam.
Corporal Bill Hatton. A U.S. Marine corporal admitted that he and other Americans fed Vietnamese children peanut butter cracker sandwiches with trioxane heat tablets hidden inside. The tablets burned the lining of their throats and even burned holes in their stomachs, as trioxane is a solid fuel tablet from military rations used to heat food, and it is not meant to be eaten. The corporal's name was Bill Hatton, and his statement went further than just the heat tablets. He said his unit threw cases of C rations off moving trucks at women and children. He described how they fired mad minutes from their position, a Miria shelter bombing. At 4:30 in the morning on the 13th of February 1991, 2 U.S. Air Force stealth bombers dropped laser-guided bombs on public shelter number 25 in Baghdad's Amiria district. The shelter had been built during the Iran-Iraq War and was used by families for protection. On that night, it was crowded with hundreds of civilians, including women and children, trying to survive the Gulf War air campaign. The first bomb cut through 9.8 feet of reinforced concrete before exploding. Minutes later, the second bomb followed the same path and detonated inside. People outside heard screams for several minutes, then silence. Inside, more than 400 civilians were killed. Those on the upper floors were burned alive instantly, while others died when boiling water from burst tanks scalded them. Survivors described blackened handprints fused to ceilings, corpses melted together into blocks of flesh, and a layer of human fat floating on the water pumped in by firefighters. The U.S. military later said they believed the shelter had been turned into a military command post, and they pointed to intercepted signals and surveillance reports as proof. But even some senior U.S. officers doubted this evidence, calling it circumstantial. Human Rights Watch and journalists who visited the site found no trace of military use, and they reported that the shelter was clearly marked as a civilian refuge. Today, the ruins stand as a memorial, with photographs of the dead on the walls. Charred handprints and burned ceilings remain in place. A woman named Greta, who lost 8 children in the bombing, became the caretaker and guide for visitors. Laconia Incident. On the 12th of September 1942, the German submarine U-156 torpedoed the British ship RMS Laconia off the coast of West Africa. Because the Laconia was armed, it was considered a normal legal military target. But once the submarine's commander, Werner Hartenstein, realized that most of the people in the water were Italian prisoners of war and civilians, he began a rescue effort. He sent open radio messages in English giving his position, promised not to attack, and called for help. Other submarines came to assist and collect the survivors. The rescue scene was chaotic, as the Laconia had tilted so badly that many of its lifeboats could not be launched. Prisoners locked below broke out, and desperate fights erupted as they rushed towards the boats to save their lives. Some men were bayoneted as they tried to reach the boats, while others were slashed or shot when climbing aboard. Sharks circled in the bloody water. U-156 stayed on the surface, carrying nearly 200 survivors on its deck and towing more in lifeboats. Then, on the 16th of September, a US B-24 bomber spotted the submarine. It saw the Red Cross flag and even received signals in English, some from Hartenstein himself, others from a British officer aboard, explaining that there were survivors, including women and children. The aircrew reported this, but their commander ordered an attack. Bombs and depth charges fell among the lifeboats, killing many people, and forced U-156 to release the survivors and dive to save itself. Other submarines continued the rescue, but still, the death toll was staggering. Out of 2,732 people on the Laconia, only about 976 to 1,083 survived, and between 1,658 and 1,757 died, most of them Italian prisoners of war. Meanwhile, the American airmen reported that they had sunk U-156, received medals for the attack, and faced no investigation or punishment. The case was quietly dropped. The bombing of a rescue effort shocked the German Navy, and because of this, on September 17th, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz issued the Laconia Order, forbidding U-boats from rescuing survivors. From then on, German submarines followed a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. The order became a central issue at the Nuremberg trials, where prosecutors argued that Dönitz and his submariners had committed war crimes. However, the move backfired once the full story of the Laconia incident and Allied practices came out. The tribunal criticized the order for being harsh and unclear, but did not add extra punishment to Dönitz's sentence for this charge. Legal experts later judged the American attack on U-156 as a clear example of a war crime. Under international law, enemy submarines rescuing survivors under a Red Cross flag are not lawful targets while doing so. Maywand Kill Team. A 15-year-old Afghan boy was working in a field when U.S. soldiers threw a grenade at him, shot him, and then posed for photos with his body. The sergeant then cut off his little finger as a trophy. That was the beginning of the Maywand district murders, a series of killings carried out in 2010 by a self-named kill team from the U.S. Army's 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company. A month later, soldiers killed a 22-year-old man, who was later believed to have been deaf or mentally disabled and kept part of his skull. Keeping body parts as trophies was a recurring characteristic of these killings. Then they killed Mullah Adadad with a grenade and gunfire in front of his family. Once again, they amputated a finger and kept it. When local elders complained that Adadad had been unarmed, a platoon leader came back to the village and told residents the man had acted aggressively, insisting the unit did not kill people randomly. However, photos later published by Der Spiegel and Rolling Stone told another story. They showed soldiers smiling over corpses, holding body parts, and even 2 Afghans cuffed together beside a sign that read, "Talibans are dead." Senior NATO officials in Kabul compared the images to the infamous Abu Ghraib prison photos. The truth finally came out because a soldier reported the crimes to his superiors after he had first been beaten by fellow soldiers for speaking up. Another soldier had also tried to raise alarm months earlier by telling his father, who called military hotlines in the US but got no response. Once the army acted, charges spread across the platoon. 5 soldiers were charged with murder, and 7 more faced charges for drug use, assaults, obstruction, and covering up the crimes. In court, one of them, a 22-year-old soldier, admitted guilt to 3 premeditated murders and told the judge the plan was to kill people. He was sentenced to 24 years and agreed to testify against the others. In the end, 11 of the 12 soldiers charged were convicted of crimes connected to the killings or the cover-up, with some receiving life sentences and others lighter punishments. Phoenix Program. The Phoenix Program was created to find and destroy the Viet Cong's political network hidden among ordinary civilians. The idea was straightforward but ruthless. The Viet Cong were not only strong because of their fighters in the jungle, but they also had a hidden system inside their communities. This infrastructure included people who recruited new members, gathered information, spread propaganda, moved supplies, and replaced local leaders with their own. Phoenix was built to break that system, and it used infiltration, capture, interrogation, and targeted killings. Success was measured by how many people were neutralized, with that word covering different outcomes: prison, defection, or death. From 1968 to 1972, they claimed to have neutralized 81,740 suspected Viet Cong, including 26,369 killed. About 87% of those deaths were officially recorded as happening during regular South Vietnamese and American military operations, while the rest were attributed directly to Phoenix operatives. To carry this out, Phoenix relied on provincial reconnaissance units, or PRUs, and a network of interrogation centers. PRU teams grabbed suspects or raided homes where they believed Viet Cong cadres lived. Then, interrogators tried to force out names and structures for the next round of raids. On paper, there were rules. For example, some special laws said that 3 different sources were needed to accuse someone. In practice, though, things were far harsher. Large sweeps often dragged in innocent people. Information gained under interrogation was used to guide search and destroy missions, and torture was part of the process in South Vietnamese centers, with Americans often supervising. Witnesses later described beatings, electric shocks to genitals, water torture, suspension by ropes, rape, and even deaths during questioning. Some extreme claims about Phoenix were later questioned, but even inside the program's own records, there was no doubt about the larger pattern of cruelty. For example, some Vietnamese rivals accused one another of being Viet Cong to settle old disputes. In response to all of this, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong leaders ordered assassinations of Phoenix staff. Later, anger grew as details leaked out. Journalists, veterans, and former officials spoke against it. Congress held hearings where Phoenix was described as a system of murder without faces or names. The CIA defended itself, saying it preferred capturing suspects alive and never officially approved assassinations. Still, public pressure grew, and Phoenix was officially shut down in 1972. A similar program, Plan F6, continued under the South Vietnamese government until the end of the war. Bear River Massacre. At dawn, on a normal day in January, soldiers under Colonel Patrick Edward Connor reached a Native American camp of the Shoshone people. These people had gathered there for the winter because by then, they were already on the edge of survival, as settlers had taken over their land, eaten up their food sources, fenced off fields, and hunted the animals they relied on. Hunger drove some Shoshone to raid farms and supply trains, and settlers asked the army to protect them. Connor, though, wanted a decisive blow. He had already written that he planned to chastise the Shoshone. The Shoshone tried to prepare, digging rifle pits and setting up willow brush as cover, but their weapons were few and often outdated. At first, they held off the soldiers' frontal attack, inflicting most of the U.S. casualties in those early minutes. But then Connor changed tactics. He sent cavalry to attack from the sides and infantry to block escape routes. After about 2 hours of fighting, the Shoshone ran out of ammunition. Once resistance collapsed, the soldiers swept through the lodges. Survivors later said women were and the wounded, including children, were executed. Others hid under piles of bodies or burrowed into the riverbanks. By the end, between 250 and 400 Shoshone were dead, most of them women and children, while only about 21 U.S. soldiers were killed. Connor was initially praised as a hero by most, promoted to brigadier general, and went on to lead more campaigns against Native Americans. The Bear River Massacre is remembered as one of the deadliest single killings of Native Americans by U.S. forces, and for generations it was officially called a battle, but Shoshone oral history kept the truth alive. In 1990, the site was declared a National Historic Landmark. Morro Crater Massacre. In March 1906, a volcanic crater on the island of
This is Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. It's seen as the most evil book in history. In it, he describes his life story, his plan to start a new